Good morning, I'm Bill Brandt and I'm at Las Flores Community Gardens this morning here in Thousand Oaks, and we're going to do some pruning on some fruit trees. I am actually a member of the Organic Garden Club of Ventura County, and that's basically the auspices of me pruning today. And I'm also a member of the California Rare Fruit Growers, which is all over the state, and we do a lot of pruning because we grow all kinds of fruit trees. And we're going to start with a fruit tree. I'm not even sure what this one is. And somebody got to it already. It's a great thing because this is kind of what they look like when they're pruned already. You can see the tops are cut off. The tops are commonly called whips. Whips sometimes look like this. This is from my fig tree at home. And I brought these because I knew this tree was pruned already. And that's the easiest thing you can do in pruning, is take the whips off. You don't want anything higher than you can reach. And then here's one from a plum tree. So there's a real funny whip. That's the biggest whip I ever saw. Here's one from an apple tree. They look kind of similar, and you get the idea. But this one's from a peach tree, so they don't always have one whippy branch. Sometimes they have side branching, and this was taken right up here, and a similar one from another tree. So this person took all the whips off. That's good. They cut some outside so that it wasn't growing out too far. That's great. And the other thing you do in your pruning, generally speaking, is you thin out the inside where there are too many branches. So if we look at this here now, we're going to see that it's been pruned pretty well, but it's a little thick. I see a few branches too many in here. So I'm going to take one that's right here. There are two branches filling the same space. I'm going to cut this one off. There we go. We've opened it up a little. You're fighting funguses by letting the air through, and then you're also giving it more light. I don't like this branch here. It's just a little too much. Here's a branch here you may not see from your camera angle. Here's one. There are two right there. Look at that. One of them's got to go. I don't think it matters which. And so now, we still have another branch here. Let's get that. Thin out a little, and so now here's a branch coming from over there, and so you see a lot of cross branching of these. Now, one thing you don't do, you don't just clean off all the little branches. A lot of the time those are fruit spurs, and if you take all the little branches off, you say, gee, it doesn't have any fruit on it this year. I wonder why. Because you took off the main place where they're fruiting, and I'm not sure what this tree is, but a little bit of thinning here would go a long way to get rid of some of these branches. And no, you don't want to leave a stump there. Okay, so that's the very beginning on this fruit tree. So here's a bundle of branches. This is a mulberry, by the way, and I'm going to cut this branch out. These two have the same space, and then, you can do a little thinning out. Some of these, it'll just kind of thin out a bit. And so that you get the idea of thinning out branches. I would just cut this off for simplicity. And sometimes you just take off a branch. And here's one over here that's a really good example. So thinned out on the interior so you get more. This is a hideous branch. Now this is the other thing, crossing branches. The easiest no-brainer is crossing branches. So you take them and say, which one do I like better? And so we get rid of the crossing branch. And so you get rid of crossing branches, you get rid of too many in one spot. And essentially you get opened up. And this is a bundle. Okay. And this is such an overabundance of branches here. Okay, so that's the interior look at this too. Okay, so this is a plum and apricot crosses tree. They are sometimes called plum cots, but if they've been crossed another time with plum, then they're a pluot. And if they're crossed more times with apricot, they are apriums. They're generally called interspecifics. And therefore, this tree is actually sold as a 3 or 4 variety of interspecifics in the plum and apricot families. And so that's kind of cool. Apparently this is a good bearing tree, which is kind of a rarity as far as I'm concerned with these interspecifics, because a lot of the time they don't bear that much. But at the bottom we've got a curiosity. In this planting in the pot was what is it again? It's a Honeycrisp apple growing here, and that's history. We don't need a Honeycrisp growing with the interspecifics. That was kind of a silly thing. Now we can go back to the same idea. We can start by cutting off all the whips that was broken off, and we got whips, and we're going to cut all those. You can go crazy. You can sometimes aim it. Pick up a branch. That right there is drop pruning. I picked a branch that was coming out of it, and now that'll never look like it got chopped off like this one did so much. But actually for whips, you're not caring that much about how much you're cutting off. And so I'm sure the cameraman's gonna have fun with this, but I like to leave a few buds above where it was pruned last year right here. You see it was pruned here, and that way we get some new buds. I don't like this stump. And so then we can do some thinning. I see some crossing here. Here's a branch. It's kind of opened up already. And so I would go around and cut more whips out of this in the top. And the idea not being too tall. And by the way, these are fruit spurs. This is a perfect example of a fruit spur. There's a fruit spur. And plums and apricots are both known for having fruit spurs. This is a fruit spur. This is a fruit spur. Occasionally there's somebody who's pruning and they decide to neaten up their tree and they cut off all these funny little branches. And then they wonder why there's no fruit. It's because those will bear year after year. That'll form other little tiny spurlets, and it'll have fruit on there. So leave the fruit spurs. Yes, you'd go up here and cut off the whips. Maybe branches are too much here, but the fruit spurs stay. Okay, so now I'm thinking I could finish the job of doing a topping of all of the whips. This tree doesn't have that many up here. It really isn't the best example of, I mean, it has a few whips, but some trees are just plain crazy with whips, and you do a lot of cutting off. But yeah, you bring it back in a lot of places. And here's one that's crossing right there. That's a crossing branch. It's just screaming, get me out of here. I don't have any business crossing over here. And this is a beautiful branch right here. It's open, fairly open as a tree, but still you can cut it. Now you come to a new concept, and that is cutting back some older growth, because newer growth sometimes is nice to have. So I'll cut this one back. And there are two that you probably can't see, but one of them's gonna go. And here's an older branch, but it has a lot of bundles of, these may all be blossoms, so I just don't want it dropping down here. So in some cases you cut things back, and in theory you're taking out 2/3 to 3/4 of the new growth on stone fruits. That could be 2/3 of the growth on all of them, or it could be 2/3 of the little branches and leaving only 1 out of every 3 little branches, or a combination of those. And so you just keep looking around and saying, I see some crossing branches, I see 2 in the same spot. And so ultimately you can, sometimes you just take the top out of a branch even during the growing season so that it'll cause it to branch more. This is really crossing with some too many branches here. And so we're opening it up. Oh, I see a nice spot to get rid of. And leaving one nice fruiting branch here. And so you get the idea how we've brought it down, open it up, and then we've got those suckers down there. That's show me where I'm looking. Anything growing below the graft is death to the tree. You get rid of any suckers which are growing out of the roots. And this graft right here is not a good spot. It's at the ground level. It should be above the ground 2 or 3 or 4 inches. But at any rate, everything growing out of the ground has to go, because that'll form a whole new tree at the expense of the parent tree itself here. And eventually, if you left this and in 10 or 15 years later, you'd see this sucker growing up and completely covering and shading out the grafted tree you want to grow. So the suckers all have to grow everything below the ground. So this is an old fruit spur from a couple of years ago, and here's a new one growing out of it. Oh. This one's broken, so we can get rid of, but you don't clean up. So this is a long, glorified fruit spur. These are fruit spurs right here. You see these?
Is it with the little buds on
them? The little short, and you're going to see 3 buds on them. That's 1 leaf bud and 2 flower buds, sometimes more flower buds. So, kind of close in here, we could kind of open it up. This is a myriad of too much in here, so we could cut this and just start opening up, leaving that fruit bud. And these don't want to grow in here that much. That's 1 fruit spur I got accidentally. And occasionally, the sad thing is when you graft on your fruit tree, as somebody had done on the last one, and sometimes you cut the graft, and then all of a sudden you see your graft on the floor. So I'm going to leave one of these branches. I'm going to take a bud, let it go out from there. Sometimes you have so many, you just have to get busy and start. Now this one right here is coming up in the middle. That doesn't want to go, it's misdirected. Okay, so I don't like this here either, and that one there. Okay, open it up. The question is, I've heard that some trees fruit on last year's growth. So here's a branch, and it's absolutely true, with stone fruits. This is not last year, this is 2 or 3 years ago. It might have fruit on maybe a bud here, but that's unusual. Over here is last year's growth. This is definitely last year's growth. And here's a fruit spur, which is from last year. And this is last year, so this will all have fruit. And with untended, unpruned trees, unfortunately, you get them growing way out and too thick, and all you've got is fruiting on the out 6 inches everywhere, which is a nightmare. But anyway, so here, yeah, you'd keep this, and this whole thing is new growth. And here's a little spur, and so that's where it's going to grow. That's why you don't cut off all the new little tiny branches. If you did that and got the fruit spurs, you'd have no fruit on this. This is another plum tree, and it's basically the same pruning as we did a minute ago. And the problem is that we have way too many branches down low. And if you get a single trunk going up like 3 feet, you can put a collar on it like they put on bird feeders, or you can put a stovepipe on it like they do on palm trees in Hawaii, and that keeps the rodents and everything else from climbing it. This one is an absolute nightmare. I'd have to cut off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 branches, and it still wouldn't be a single trunk, so I'm not going to do that. But if you get a trunk this high, you can put the collar or stovepipe on it, and then rodents, possum, raccoons, and all can't climb it, and then you've gotten rid of 3/4 of your problems, minus the birds, of course. So that's one thing which you could do. Okay, we have citrus. Now this is a young citrus tree, and a lot of the time, most of the time, young citrus trees don't need much in the way of pruning. This is a pretty good example. There's plenty of sunlight getting to the interior. It can have fruit everywhere through here. That's ideal. Once in a while, they send sprouts up going real long. You can pinch those out any time of year. And if it's growing out over a walkway, prune it. Whenever you prune it, it's going to form branches going to the side. This one is a long way from needing a big pruning. Sometimes you cut them at the bottom so they don't drape to the ground. And now fast forward and think of this as a 20-year-old tree, and it's a great big mound, and the whole thing has all of its leaves on the outside as a large shell like, and you go inside and there's nothing. So at that time, you come, I'm looking from the south, you come to the southeast and you make a hole into that tree, and you'd be up like 8 feet or so, 6 to 8 feet, and you make a hole about this big, beach ball or bigger size, and then to the southwest you'd make a big hole, and that allows light to come into the center of the tree, and now the tree will form branches and fruit inside in that dead zone. And that was given to us by an orchard manager at Calavo. They do the same thing with avocado trees. Now the biggest and most important part of all is if you're going to do some pruning on your citrus, especially if it's too big and you're chopping it way back or cutting these windows, do it now in January, early February, anytime from October till February, because that's going to let the tree grow out and flush out a lot of new growth before the citrus leaf miners come in May or June, which are there they eat the fresh growth in the summertime, and it'll look a little bit ugly. You don't want to spray for insecticides on that. It's a waste of time. It doesn't hurt the tree, doesn't hurt the fruit, and you just do your heavy pruning now or by February, and that'll give it a chance to do all its flushing and not have the citrus leaf miner in the growth. This is a cherimoya. It came from the tree over my left shoulder here. And the cherimoya tree is the oddest tree in the orchard. It will actually lose its leaves in about May and completely defoliate and then start to grow new leaves, and it starts blooming. It blooms all the way through the summer into September. And the blooms don't even look like flowers. They look like 3 little fingers that open up a little, and you have to even hand pollinate them. Although this didn't get hand pollinated. A few insects are here which will pollinate, but you'll get very little fruit. If you do hand pollinating, you'd get 40 cherimoyas off of this tree. I see one right over in the middle. So the pruning on those, you do in May. You could prune it way back. You'd take this way down to here. You could cut up the skirt from the bottom, and you cut it way, way, way back. Height of a person, a lot like a fig tree, which we'll see in a moment. This is a fig tree. What do we do with figs? This one doesn't have the biggest problem that figs have. Big trees that are fig trees that are really old can be 8 feet tall. They can be spread all over Hell's half acre, and you don't want them to grow that big. This one's already small, that's good. I would cut out little branches at the bottom. This has leaves on it still. I would just take those off. It has fruit on it, believe it or not, and these actually end up being your breba crop, B-R-E-B-A, for in June, and those will finish growing then. And this tree is a little confused as far as losing its leaves. But anyway, you leave those on, they're probably going to finish growing, and that's interesting, and they're wonderful, although some people say they're not as good as a regular. But when you get a nice big fig in about June, you're pretty happy with it, whether it compares better than the ones you'll get in August or not. So this tree really just, I'm not real happy with the fact that it has several trunks. I would grow one trunk up and try and let it branch out at 3 or 4 feet, and then you can keep the critters off with the collar or the stovepipe. But having said that, yeah, I would here's a branch you can't see from your camera angle. It's going way out. Get rid of that branch going way out. We've got a bunch of branches here, so take out one and leave others. This one's growing way out here, so I'd cut that branch out, and essentially it doesn't need that much. What I saw was a great picture of Edgar Valdivia, who's in the Rare Fruit Growers, and he was in an orchard and all the fig trees were at his shoulder height, and which means they were about 5.5 feet tall, and they were pruned. This was wintertime, painted white, and so fig cut them down. They're going to grow all the new growth puts fruit on it as it grows, and so the heavier you prune them, the better, the more fruit you're going to have on it. So, no. So now if I cut all the way through that, that's going to rip off the bottom. I'm going to do my own custom cutting here, which usually I start with a cut underneath, and you go from there. Okay, this tree's a wreck because every critter in the world can climb up and get all the fruit. To avoid that, you can cut off all the lower branches, leave this one single stem. This will be the trunk as it grows bigger. And then you could put a collar on it and keep a lot of the critters off, or a stovepipe. And so for that reason, we're going to cut off a whole bunch of branches here. And we're going to savage this tree, and guess what? It's going to grow back because it's a very healthy, vigorous tree. And we're going to cut this. This will take a few seconds. I'm starting the wrong way from the top. Actually, you want to start with a cut underneath, and then you cut outside that, and if a whole branch is heavy and it tears off like this, it won't rip down the side. So now I can finish cutting from the top here, and you didn't have a good camera angle on that, but you can see that in textbooks, how to prune a branch off, and you start by cutting an undercut, and then, so we're going to take this off too, and this will be our new trunk. And this will end up being a whole different beautiful tree with a big head up, the crown where it belongs in a couple of years.
Go ahead and take that big one off while you got it, while I'm here.
Okay, well this one we're not worried about ripping because it is growing right out of the ground. You usually try not to put your saw into the soil, but in this case, I'll make an exception. Really savaging this tree, but it will be better off for having had this major pruning. There we go. Brutal, huh? Ah, the monster in me has taken over. There we go. This is a Zutano avocado tree, and just like the branch of Zutano on my tree at home, it's blooming. Look at all this. It's blooming, and mine at home has 4 varieties on it, and the Zutano is the one that's blooming. So what do we like and don't like about this? I love almost every bit of it. The only problem is it's about to get too tall. So you can literally start pinching out top buds on these. I wouldn't cut any branches off, except, this is maybe too close for the critters at the bottom. You want to prune up a little skirt so it's not laying on the ground. It's beautifully open. Eventually this will form the enormous globe like a citrus tree, and nothing will be inside. And that's when you open up your window, about 2 or 3 feet in diameter on the southeast side and the southwest side, but this is about 5 to 10 years away from needing that. So beautiful tree, and seems to be leaning a little. I might be pruning out some tips over here to keep it, cause it to grow sideways instead of farther out. We don't want the tree leaning over. So that's basically about avocados. Yes, I'm here I'm representing the Organic Garden Club of Ventura County here at Las Flores Community Gardens Orchard. And we just did a pruning, which is January, February style. I call it old style because some new experts are claiming you spread less disease by pruning in the middle of the season, like July or August, perhaps after you've picked your fruit. And so with that in mind, I do a little bit of that, but it's awfully difficult to prune a fruit tree when it's fully leafed out and you can't see where to prune. It's hard enough when you have the leaves gone. So at any rate, this is a winter pruning, and we had a good day today.